So Dave Aranda has done a lot to add to this program throughout the last, year or so, but it hasn't come without some difficult decisions, right? We've been through his track record. He's hired and fired a couple of coordinators. He had to replace his offensive coordinator this year, essentially replace his defensive coordinator this year by saying, nope, I got it. I'll call the plays. And as good as the offense was throughout the year, Dave's defense was not that impressive. He had some all Big 12 players like the aforementioned Keaton Thomas and Matt Jones. I thought he had some good workman-like guys in the interior of the defensive line, Trevor Ma'ai, Linus Noel. But there left a lot to be desired on the defensive side of the ball, specifically in the secondary. And so Dave Aranda this week on Monday had to make some, I'm sure, tough decisions. And it certainly looks like he is cleaning house on the defensive side of the ball. He retains Matt Powledge, at least at the time of recording of this, the defensive coordinator. But Caleb Collins, the outside linebackers coach, and Kevin Curtis, the cornerbacks coach, both let go by Dave Aranda on Monday. And it's not a huge surprise, even if you are a casual football fan and you want to look at the positions that they did not excel in defensively. Outside linebacker would be one. Middle linebacker, they certainly did with those two all Big 12 guys, and yet didn't have a ton of speed at outside linebacker. And if you just watch the Texas Bowl, you could have identified probably their biggest problem, which was the secondary and their coverage, and specifically the cornerbacks. Because the guy you thought was going to be your best cornerback this year in Caden Jenkins, LSU saw that as a weakness and exploited it a couple of times. And it wasn't just Caden, it was all over that secondary. But this was a team that was not good against the pass all year. 11th in the Big 12 defending the pass. I think it was 230 yards a game they gave up. 304 against Nussmeier in the Texas Bowl. Like that's been a big soft spot for them. Like in any way you look at that, it was a soft defense and it was an easy place to attack. And I did the video on it last week. Like they need to go and get a couple of corners out of the portal. And that's a position, and Dave Aranda said it too, that's a position we really need to improve. In that post-game press conference, he talked about how all these other question marks around the team in terms of positional units turned into check marks, right? We're talking about, wide receiver and running back, kind of figuring out what that was. Offensive line, interior defensive line, they all became check marks. Quarterback, big check mark. The ones that didn't were secondary, corner, and what he didn't say, that I will say, is the pass rush. Pass rush hasn't been good in years. I mean, we're going on 3 years now that it has not been very effective. And Caleb Collins certainly would have had a hand in that in terms of outside linebackers when Aranda would throw out a 3-4. And Kevin Curtis obviously had a big hand to do with the cornerbacks as the cornerbacks coach. What's interesting to me about these two guys is they have both been with Dave Aranda from the beginning of the Baylor tenure. In fact, Caleb Collins goes all the way back to 2018 at LSU. Like these guys have been around a long time, and they've been around through a couple of different defensive coordinators. Ron Roberts and now Matt Powledge and essentially Dave Aranda. While there's been movement all around the coaching staff on both sides of the ball, all three phases, if you will, these guys have been there. They've stayed. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because on one hand, you can think of this positively as, they're not resting on their laurels just because they had a 6-game winning streak and they went 8-4 when no one expected them to. They're not just saying, oh, let's run it all back, because there's a lot of good that's being run back in this team. And what they're doing is taking some of the not as good positionally and trying to fix that, trying to correct that, knowing how close they were to being potentially a great team this past year, and trying not to make that mistake for 2025. So that's a positive way to look at it from a Baylor fan's perspective. But the other thing to look at is at this time last year, Dave kept his job and he fired Jeff Grimes. And I was certainly one of the people saying this on this podcast, and I know there was plenty around Baylor media and fans in general saying, when is it going to be Dave Aranda's fault? Because that was the second offensive coordinator he had fired in 4 years, and the third one he'd hired in Jake Spavital. And he's fired fired a defensive coordinator, demoted a defensive coordinator, and he's the play caller now, and it's still not very good. And I'm not saying this winter, hey, fire Dave Aranda, but it seems to me like there's an accountability thing here. And certainly Dave has turned the whole team around, and so that's why he doesn't get fired this year, obviously. I'm not one who's going to say they needed to do that. But this next year, almost sets up for 2025 to be like you have to do something big. And I think we certainly expect that and hope for that with the team that they're bringing back and the momentum that they have. But you've shook out all of the perceived dead weight from 2023 at this point, right? Anything that was a weakness last year, you fired. Offense, Jeff Grimes. You essentially demote Sean Bell. He leaves. You find a new offensive line coach. There's a couple of moves there, and all of those things get better. The things that don't get any better are outside linebackers and cornerbacks, and you get rid of those coaches too. So now it's like, if you're in Mac Rhodes' office, you got to be like, Dave, we're giving you a lot of money. We're giving your assistants a lot of money. We're giving your program a lot of money. We've gone out and gotten the type of player that you want. And now it's like, you got to do something for me. And it's got to be big. It's got to be like Big 12 championship kind of expectations. I think internally is what that's going to be. Because look, you've got the quarterback. You've got the coordinator. You don't have to worry about anything on the offensive side of the ball. You want to be the play caller? Go ahead. You want to bring in some new positional guys? Go ahead. And so far, it's been pretty good. I mean, Spavital, big time check. Jamar Chaney has been big in recruiting as well. His name's been dropped a couple of times. Mason Miller, coming from the Mike Leach tree, turned that offensive line around, even though we didn't watch any film on last year's offensive line, which worked like a charm. But now it's like, you've got all this. You've got to prove something to me. And you proved a little something this year. Absolutely. That's why you're staying on here. And that's why there's momentum around this program. But I think the expectation within those walls towards Dave Aranda and from Dave Aranda, if we're being fair, are, this isn't done. This isn't the best we can do. 8-5 is not the best we can do. It was fun this year, and it was certainly a much needed improvement. But these signs to me show that, hey, we'll give you the perfect environment, man. Bring in any coaches you want, all the players you want. You don't have to do any media, no responsibilities for that. You don't even have to have a spring game. We'll eliminate that for you. But let's go figure this out. Let's get to that next level. And it's worth noting, when Caleb Collins put out his farewell, which he did seem very appreciative, genuine appreciation of Dave and Baylor and in the Baylor community. Cameron Morgan, one of Baylor's blue chip recruits, 4-star edge rusher from South Oak Cliff, quote tweeted it with just a sad emoji. And I'm like, okay, as long as you hold on to all these guys, positional coaches, not usually as big a change as if it were a coordinator or a head coach that's leaving, but let's just make sure we keep all these guys. And that also goes to show you how much Caleb Collins had to do with the pass rush. If like a real 5 technique edge rusher, 4-star guy from high school is like, bummed. That needs to improve as well. But Dave, just keep bringing in your guys. The fact that it worked this year, you're not going to get as much heat for it, which is perfectly reasonable. But it's probably, I think, with these moves, showing that it's time to take that next step. Anyway, Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, it's also available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to like the video if you like it, and then subscribe because we want everyone that's watching to subscribe and to like the video because that helps me out a lot, helps the channel out a lot. Thank you for making it to the end of the video, and thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network part of your daily routine. We have got you covered with the most Baylor Bears athletics coverage of any outlet that's not directly tied into Baylor University. So if you want more of that, be sure to like and subscribe. Ring that notification bell to get notified every time we're dropping a video here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and sick 'em.